Euskarazko? I'm pretty confident you're quite sure that Euskera is going to become the language of the future, right? But since we are still living in the present now, I will be speaking the language of the past for the moment, namely English. I was required by the local organizers to address, since I know I don't have to convince the campaigners, the activists. Rather, we need to have on board, in the same platform, also the decision makers. And so basically, we have to see how planning waste management, given the current European regulatory context, is very much in line with most of the principles of the zero waste vision, which is basically what I do in most of my professional commitments. I work as a strategist, I provide support to the local communities, to the European Union, to the national governments, in order to try and define the strategies for waste management. But let me go stepwise. First important thing to be noticed is, zero waste is rather a travel and not a destination. I mean, what matters most in zero waste is not the final number, which is important anyway, it's worthwhile, 0. But the most important is the continued effort, the continued commitment to get there. If we still have got some residual waste, we want to see what is in there and how we can do in order to optimize and maximize separate collection, recycling, composting, waste reduction, and so on and so forth. But in order to do that, we need to keep the system flexible. The system needs flexibility. Also, what is on the agenda for the decision makers? Because we have to convince them today. First of all, apologies. This is the never-ending struggle, Windows against Macintosh. Sometimes you will have a little bit weird transitional effects in my presentation. Apologies for that. Blame it on Steve Jobs and not on me. Anyway, the decision makers, they have to plan waste management in a changing regulatory scenario. The regulatory framework at European level is changing more and more, faster and faster, and it is going our direction. Therefore, we need to make them aware that they have to make the proper choices, because once they have got infrastructure, infrastructure will be there for 20 years to come. And we need to keep the system flexible. Oh, apologies. Intensive separate collection. Is it possible intensive separate collection in large cities? Yeah, already Paul Connet gave you quite a few spot informations concerning separate collection in quite a few towns. I will reinforce it in order to make you even more confident. Then, after reduction and separate collection, we still have got some residual waste. What is the amount and the composition of residual waste? How can we play with that? And therefore, we have to fine-tune the options for residual waste in order to be able to accommodate for further increase, further growth of separate collection, recycling, composting, and waste prevention programs. Oh my God. Okay. Concerning the regulatory context at European level, we have got a few main drivers, namely the Waste Framework Directive, according to which we will have to provide at least 50% material recovery, and there's also a mandate on member states to prepare some waste prevention programs. So waste prevention is becoming a lively part of waste management. It was not until a few years ago. But now we will have to consider in local strategies also waste prevention. We have got the Packaging Directive, which embeds the principles of extended producer responsibility, and this also gives us the recycling targets, which are different for different types of materials. And we have got the Landfill Directive, which is very important, and I will have to dwell it a little bit, because it tells us that we have to divert as much as biodegradable waste as possible from landfills, but it also gives us an obligation on pre-treatment of residual waste. And this is basically what the decision makers are most concerned about, because they say, okay, what if I get to 70% and the remainders 30% more? The Dutch answer, the Danish answer is, okay, incineration. But this is precisely what we want to avoid. We want to skip incineration. Is there any possible alternative treatment for residual waste? I'm pretty sure you understand. I will tell you, yes, there is. Okay. So there is this common tendency across Europe to reduce further and further reliance on landfilling. These are in the old Central Western Europe, the kilograms per inhabitant in the year of waste sent to landfilling. Of course, there is an attempt by the industry, is it me? There is an attempt by part of the industry to hijack the zero waste concept towards zero landfilling. And you know what it blends? It blends certainly some recycling, but it also considers incineration. No, we have to go lower and lower with reliance on landfilling, but we have to consider alternatives to incineration. And basically, the main message coming from the European directive is, let's make Europe a material recycling society. Not just to make me happy, to make Paul happy, to make you happy because we are environmentalists, you know, but also on account of occupational implications, create jobs, and geopolitical implications, because we have got a resource scarcity crisis which is coming up, just because China and India, they have got growing economies, and they are exerting a growing pressure on the international market for primary raw materials. So it's wiser to take a look at what's still in our buckets, whether there is in our waste some material to be extracted and to be reused into our industrial processes. The other key message is decoupling the economic growth and the waste growth. We have to stop waste from increasing, and rather we have to try and decrease it. And yeah, when it comes, this is also a very important message which was lately forwarded by the European Parliament. It adopted a resolution a few weeks ago on April the 20th, calling on the Commission to revise the Environmental Action Programme, and it states we should set more ambitious prevention, reuse and recycling targets, including a net decrease in waste generation. So the regulatory drivers in the near future, in the next years to come, will still look different from what they are now. And we have to keep the system able to allow further growth in separation, recycling, composting, and waste prevention. So we need flexible options also for the management of residual waste. Well, there are some ready effect actions. You know, when it comes to waste prevention, normally we say there's some industrial responsibility on that. Eco-design is important. But also there is something that the communities may do at the local level right away. Home composting, sustainable event management. Don't use the throwaway cutlery and dishes. Use reusable or compostable ones. Tap water. The cloth nappies, we have got a huge amount of nappies in residual waste, because residual waste, as Paul was saying, concentrates all the mistakes. And if we have got 5% nappies in municipal solid waste, and residual waste is only 1/3 of the starting amount, it will treble the percentage in residual waste. It will become 15% nappies in residual waste. And then de-assimilation. De-assimilation, you don't need to do anything else but taking the big containers off the roads. Because once you take the big containers off the roads, you won't have any further industrial waste delivered into the municipal solid waste management system. And this is what happened, for instance, in Capannori. Capannori had these very big road containers, 3.2 cubic meters, lots of industrial and commercial waste delivered into municipal solid waste. And when they introduced curbside collection, puerta a puerta, porta a porta in Catalonia and Italy, curbside in England, basically getting rid of the big road containers, they got rid of industrial waste, 20% less of waste to be dealt with, 20% less. Okay, what does it take to get there? Because we are given more and more ambitious material recovery targets at European level, and we have got some waste plans which are foreseeing increasing recycling rates. But we know that in order to go very high in separate collection and material recovery, we need to implement curbside collection, and this has to cover also the organics. Without the organics, you know, still in Europe, and above all in Southern Europe, the organics are still the majority of municipal solid waste, between 25–30% up to 50% in southern regions, in Italy, in Spain, and so on and so forth. And so it's important also to include the organics in separate collection programs. But in order to make you confident, because you say, yeah, we know Usurbil is doing very well. We know Hernani is doing very well. But what about San Sebastian? What about Madrid? What about Barcelona? Okay, let's take a look. Probably, you know, this was the new European map which was drawn by The Economist. It's the very important magazine about politics, economy, and so on. And they were grouping together the different European countries by similarity in attitudes, in economics, and so on. For instance, they put Poland aside Ireland because they said, yeah, there's many Polish people going there to work as plumbers. Or England near Portugal because they go playing golf in Portugal in summertime. And so they say, we make the trip shorter. But let me draw your attention to this one. They totally cut off southern Italy from Europe because they said it's, you know, bordello. They call it bordello. Bordello is not a nice word, you know, dirty house, or prostitution, something messy, messy. As if Italy was not part of Europe because they said, yeah, it's messy, nothing works there. Well, at least as far as waste management is concerned, yes, Salerno. Then, of course, Paul gave you the timeline for that, and he said in 1 year, but 1 year was since planning until full coverage of the population. But in those neighborhoods where curbside collection was implemented, the first day of collection, they went up to 75%. It's the first day. It doesn't take 1 century. It's the first day. And organics play a very big role in this respect. Of course, it needs adaptation to the high-rise buildings, but it may be done. And experiences are there. For instance, Turin, which is the 4th biggest town in Italy, 1 million inhabitants. They already cover by now 60% of the population. That was reporting still 45%, but now it's 60% of the population with curbside collection. And in those neighborhoods having curbside collection, the separate collection rate is around 60%. In the other ones, it's around 25%. So it may be done. Okay, we may have some problems with housings, types of dwellings, but solutions are there, creativity is there in order to give the proper solutions to the specific problems. But I have to tell you about residual waste management. Okay, first of all, so far, we have been talking and we have been benchmarking separate collection in terms of separate collection rates, percentages. 50%, 60%, 70%, 80%, 86% Usurbil, Rofrano near Naples, 92%. No, but that was a very small village. That was impressive what I saw yesterday in Usurbil and in Hernani because they are remarkably bigger than Rofrano. But anyway, Capanori itself, after implementing paper bag systems, is now at 91% in the neighborhood, which is covered by paper bag. 91%. However, please remember that minimization of residual waste is a matter of blending separate collection and waste prevention. And if we only focus on separate collection, some mayors might say, okay, why should I be promoting home composting? It's better for me to have it separately collected in order to maximize the recycling rates. But we have to consider also the contribution by waste prevention. So probably the better parameter in the future will not be the separate collection percentage, but the minimized amount of residual waste in kilograms per inhabitant and year. You can see here, yeah, there is a tendency to a decrease in total waste amounts, an increase in the yellow bars, which is the material sent to recycling and composting, and a decrease in residual waste, remarkably less than 100 kilograms per inhabitant and year. But let's consider 100 kilograms. I made a presentation yesterday at La Diputación. There was the committee, you know, supervising waste planning and something like that. And I was making a very easy calculation. If you just consider 100 kilograms per inhabitant and year in Gipuzkoa, the population is 760,000 people. Good, right? I'm good at geography, you see. So it would mean only 76,000 tons per year in Gipuzkoa. remarkably less than nowadays. And of course, that would be no room, no capacity for an incinerator. No room, no room. There's no incinerator. A mass burn incinerator working at such a capacity, unless you want to pay 400 euros a ton or 500 euros a ton for incinerating your waste. However, what is left in residuals? We are just doing these days the new composition analysis for capannori, because we want to ascertain the effects of further and further implementation of the zero waste program. This was an old analysis from 3 or 4 years ago, and it compares capannori on the right-hand side with other municipalities still with the containers on the road. But let's focus on capannori. Organics, around 15%. Please, anyway, consider this is 15% of residual waste, and residual waste used to be then 20% of the starting amount. So 15% of 20% is 3% of organics relative to the starting amount of municipal solid waste, which are still in residual waste. Since they started from 40% organics in municipal solid waste and they go down to 3%, it means that their capture is higher than 90% of organics. And this gives the touch of how effective is curbside collection. But still, we have got some organics inside. We used to have nappies before they started the cloth nappies program, reusable nappies program. And of course, we needed to work with that in the front end, with the nappies prevention programs. But if you still have got some nappies inside, you need to stabilize it before landfilling, as it was properly remarked by Paul Cornett. They still have got 15 to 25% plastics. It's not only packaging plastic, which is targeted by separate collection, but it's also throwaway plastics such as daily objects. Of course, we want to avoid them more and more, or even durable plastics such as toys. At the end of their life, they get thrown away. But still, we have got plastics. It's mixed plastics, and we have to deal with that somehow. And then we have got paper, still some paper and cardboard in that. So how can we play with that? I was mentioning the landfill directive. The landfill directive, in first instance, mandates a sharp reduction on biodegradable waste going to landfills because it causes impacts and nuisance. Odors, leachate, methane getting into the atmosphere, climate change gas, greenhouse gas. And separate collection of paper and organics is key in that respect. The long-term target for diversion is 65%, and you have just seen that the capture rate for organics, for instance, may go up to 90%. But also, we have got an obligation on pre-treatment of the waste going to landfilling. So basically, the message coming from the landfilling directive is landfills have to be less and less, they have to be smaller and smaller, but also they have to produce the least possible impact. So, here comes the possible alternative to incineration, cold treatment of residual waste. In England, they said cool treatment of residual waste. Huh? There is a very nice Greenpeace report on that, they call it the cool alternative to incineration. You get your residual waste, you split it up by some normal screening, so you have got some small-sized materials which concentrate the dirty organics, and you stabilize it. So you have got some process losses because you are going to degrade organic matter, you lose the water vapor, and you have got a fully stabilized waste. And this reduces the impact by 80 to 90% reduction in fermentability of the waste. And then you have got the coarse materials, low moisture, low fermentability, they may go directly to landfilling in a simple scheme. This may be the simplest scheme ever. What are the mass balances? 60% coarse materials, 20% process losses, 20% stabilized waste. So in the end of the day, 60 plus 20, 80% will go to landfills. But what's important in that? First of all, you minimize the impacts because you send to landfilling only the stabilized material. Secondly, you keep flexibility in the system because that's a composting technology. It's precisely the same technology as you would use for composting or for anaerobic digestion. Therefore, you may flexibly turn your residual waste treatment facility into a composting facility, as long as your separate collection still grows up in the Diputación, in the region, in the state, and so on. And also, it takes much less time to be up and running than in incinerator. So you can feedback more promptly to the driver coming from the European Landfill Directive. But there's something more we can do. Instead of sending the coarse materials to landfilling, we can still sort them out, by means of screening, hand and optical sorting, extrusion in order to turn the mixed plastics into new objects such as benches, pavings, artificial sands, and so on and so forth. And by means of that, we have got, still 20%, roughly 20% of paper and cardboard, 20% of plastics. There's still 40% potentially recoverable material. And above all, we are recovering the high calorific value materials. Once you don't leave any paper, any plastics inside residual waste, there will be no room for energy recovery, for thermal treatment for that. And so that's important. It gives a fully fledged answer to that. So you have got material recovery instead of landfilling, and the mass balance is you would have still 20% rejects from material recovery, and some 20% stabilized waste going to landfilling. So overall, only 40% of residual waste goes to landfills. And what makes it possible is the sharp decrease of organics inside residual waste. Because once you implement curbside collection, and this is in the daily experience also in Hernani, in Usurbil, you have got an outstanding decrease in the percentage of organics in residual waste. And once you have got around 10 or 15% and even less organics inside residual waste is not dirty anymore, so you can play with that and you may recover further material. So there is cross-consistency between maximizing separate collection and also maximizing recovery of materials from residual waste. So just to go to the end. In the end of the story, where are we now? We know that 70% separate collection is achievable. It may be done. 70% with peak values remarkably higher than 70%. But in a wide area, in first instance, also for the mid-term planning, 70% is a reasonable figure. No increase of waste risings, or rather the contrary, through waste prevention programs. It's achievable, 15 to 20% less waste in the mid and short run. Further reduction of environmental footprint of landfills by means of stabilization, and you still have a further 20% process loss in residual waste. Further recovery of materials from residuals. It's achievable. Another 30-35% plastics and papers taken out of residual waste. Therefore, in the end of the story, only 40% roughly of residual waste will be landfilled. But since residual waste would only be 30% and less of the starting amount, it's only less than 12% of the starting amount of municipal solid waste. So, aren't we getting damn close to zero? So zero waste is a travel, not the destination, but the travel is getting us there. It is getting us there. We are just one step from zero waste with that. So, Eskeri Casco, for your, is it right, the pronunciation? Good. Many thanks for your attention.
Bueno, egia esan galdera pare bat
egiteko
egiteko
there is time
denbora
for
daukau.
a couple of questions if anybody wants to ask any.
Nahiko balu.
I don't know if anybody wants to ask a question.
Bai Enzoi eta baita ere
You can ask a question to Enzo or to Paul, whoever you like.
Is anyone who wants to make a question or something?
If they don't ask questions, it seems that they are convinced already, you know. So
maybe they were convinced before.
It's good. It's a good sign.
Okay.
Hola.
Bai?
Hola.
Egunon. Eskerrik asko emandako azalpenagatik, baina galdera zuzena da restoaren tratamentuan egiten dan ibilbide hori kompatible izango litzake gai hoietako ekoparke baten instalazioarekin? Hau da, gu Katalunian ezautu ditugun ekoparkeak horretarako erabili genezake selezio dana, baino 130, 25, 10ekin egin behar den tratamentu hori dana, bertederoa, gelditzen da materiala estabilizatu, bertederoa eraman baino leheno, aprobetxarri guzia dana kenduta. Ekibalente izango litzake?
May I? Right. You mentioned the proper situation, the eco parks in Catalonia. For the moment, there are some eco parks. Eco Park 4 is recovering 30% of residual waste for the moment. It may be higher because they are using optical sorting, which increases the value but decreases the amount of recovered materials. Whereas if you have, it's a trade-off. Are you seeking the best value from the material you recover, or are you seeking to minimize the material sent for landfilling? If you want to minimize the material sent to landfilling, you have to work with mixed plastics. And in that case, it's much better to consider extrusion than optical sorting, or you may combine them both. The problem in eco-parks is that, yeah, they started a good way, but they are not evolving because separate collection in Barcelona is not being implemented for food waste, I mean. Whereas in the surrounding mancomunidades in Catalonia, they are doing very well with separate collection, but I'm sure you know. Of course, for me, having a cold alternative to incineration is not a goal, it is an instrument to keep the system flexible and to have further and further growth in separate collection and waste prevention programs. But your question was right, okay.
Any other question? Beste galderen bat?